So we will resume the presentations by the breakout groups. So the first breakout group did the presentation, which was essentially on the first section of the second chapter. That was from verses 11 to 30, the discussion of Sankhya, the nature of the soul. So if I can invite the second group spokesperson, which is verses 31 to 37, to take 2 or 3 minutes and share with the group their discussion, the conclusions of the discussion on this section of the verses.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu, this is Prema Madhurya. From verses 31 through 37, what we comprehended on this is that Krishna has changed his style from Gyan to a more materially rewarding style for Arjuna. He starts by telling him the need to fight and that his swadharma, his specific duty, is that of a Kshatriya. Prabhupada explains to us the meaning of Shatantrayate, the one who gives protection from harm. And then explains in the purport that just like a Brahmana engages in sacrifices, a Kshatriya must engage in fighting. Brahmana does not get sinful reactions from animal slaughter if done appropriately. And so Arjuna has nothing to fear. He will not get sinful reaction. Then he goes on to say that if he were to die on the battlefield, he would attain the heavenly planets. And if he won, he would get his lost kingdom back. He also tells Arjuna not to fear for his relatives because they would also attain the heavenly planets if they were defeated in the battlefield. And then finally, he concludes by saying that if he refrains from performing his duties, his religious duty of fighting the Kauravas, he would have to deal with infamy, which is worse for a Kshatriya than actually dying. His compassion for his family, which was basically based on illusion, would be treated more as cowardly weakness. So all in all, he engages him to engage in fighting. Those are our thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mataji. Very good. Nice summary. Question. So this part of Krishna's presentation, it also negates some of the objections that Arjuna had put in terms of engaging in war. Were you able to correlate that?
Can you repeat that, Prabhu? It's coming broken.
So this section of verses, it negates some of the arguments that Arjuna had put forth in chapter 1 about why you should not fight the battle. And so we know he had put in 5 reasons. Did the group, was the group able to correlate that it basically addresses these concerns by Arjuna?
Yes, we were able to correlate. He started with, I think it's 2.7, where he says Varna Sankara was one of the prime reasons. And then we thought that this section focused more on compassion for family. So he gives some of the concerns where he didn't want unwanted progeny. He didn't want to lose his relatives. So this 31 through 37, we thought focused more on compassion, on the loss of lives.
Okay, close. It actually addresses 2 of the reasons. One was that Arjuna had talked about enjoyment, that if I kill everybody in the battlefield, then who will I enjoy with? And then Krishna defeats it by saying that if you win, you will enjoy an unrivaled kingdom. If you lose, you go to heaven and you enjoy over there. However, if you don't fight, you will get infamy. And that's the cause of despair. So he defeats that argument. And the second, as you mentioned, was the fear of sinful reactions. So Arjuna had said that I kill my grandfather, my relatives. So sin will infest me. And Krishna says, by not following your duty, you will be considered to be sinful. If you follow your duty, then sin will not touch you. Right? So these two things are defeated. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the next group, verses 28 to 53. I'm sorry, verses 38 to 53.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dhanavad Pranam. So our group discussed about Buddhi Yoga. So in the section 2, Krishna was talking about Sankhya Yoga or the Gyan Yoga, where it's difficult to sustain, and because our senses need to be engaged all the time. And in the section 3, which Mataji just told, was about the Karma Kanda, and those benefits are temporary, and they give reaction. So then in this section, Krishna gives Buddhi Yoga, which is a combination of both, but he's talking in the Buddhi Yoga, he's talking about doing your prescribed duties without attachment to the fruits of the work. So then Krishna then talks about Niha Vikraman Asti Pratyabhavana Vidyate, where he's saying that this Buddhi Yoga, there's no loss or diminution in this endeavor. And the people who follow this, they have one aim and they're resolute in their but the people who are not resolute, they wander in different directions. Then Krishna talks about Arjuna to go beyond the Vedas, because the Vedas are giving so many flowery language, and it talks about the fruitive actions. So he's asking Arjuna to go beyond the 3 modes of material nature, and Buddhi Yoga is that yoga, because then you're working with you're doing your prescribed duties without the attachment to the fruits of your results. And then Krishna says about saying karmanya adikar ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phala heturbhur ma te karmo so akarmani astva akarmi, where we are not we are entitled to do the we are entitled to do our prescribed duties, but we are not entitled to the fruits of our actions. So Krishna asks him to work in this Buddhi Yoga, and this Buddhi Yoga has many benefits. That it gives us no material reaction. Our mind will be fixed, and we can get to trance, the samadhi. It has no material reaction, and there was one more benefit, I forget. It takes us beyond the Vedas, the flowery language. So he is encouraging Arjuna to take up this Buddhi Yoga.
Very good. Thank you, Prabhu. So one question, in the previous section, Krishna is asking Arjuna to follow the injunctions of the Vedas. He says, you're a Kshatriya, it's your duty to fight. Now he is rejecting the Vedas. Right? Mamavashvitam, mam pushpitam vacha avadante prabhadante ata. So he's saying that these Vedas are full of flowery words, and you transcend them. What was there any discussion on what caused this change in the mood, or what's behind this change in the mood of Krishna's instructions?
There was no discussion, but as far as I understand, Prabhu, that that karma kanda is temporary, is like they give the reactions still. So if we work so that there will be reaction, so Krishna is giving the higher course. When we do from karma kanda, then you will go to the stage of nishkam karma yoga. So now you get to the taste where you are doing your prescribed duties, but without attachment. So you will have no reaction. So you will go beyond this material modes of nature.
Okay. So you're saying it's a progression.
It's a progression.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the last group, verses 54 to 72.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So our group, actually, I think there were two questions, and I'm actually kind of zoning out on the two questions that we discussed. I do have some notes that we took from those discussions, but I don't remember the exact two questions, but I can kind of give an overview of what we discussed. So in this portion of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is asking about the Sthita Prajna. What are the symptoms of a person in Krishna consciousness? How does he talk? How does he sit? How does he walk? So he's basically just trying to understand how to identify such a person who is in Krishna consciousness. So what we discussed was a person who is in Krishna consciousness is free from any attachments. So he's doing his job without any expectation of any results. He's always thinking about Krishna. He does not react to sense objects or sense gratifications. His senses are under his control. We talked about the example of tortoise that Krishna mentions. So when the sense, so tortoise has the ability to, I guess, takes his limbs in whenever needed, he takes them out. So in pretty much the same way, person who is in Krishna consciousness actually has ability to control their senses and understand when to take the senses out and when to kind of draw them back in. The biggest thing that helps in one becoming Krishna consciousness was we talked about following the 4 regulatory principles. It develops steady intellect, and we talked about kind of developing the higher taste. We also talked about material detachment, and how that comes is basically working in Buddhi Yoga. So that's kind of in a nutshell that I think we discussed. All the Matajis, I think, who were on the call, if I missed anything, apologies for that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Prabhu. So let me share a slide for this. This is perhaps one of the most important parts of the chapter, because it's essentially philosophy in action. So Arjuna, being a Kshatriya, he's a person of action. So he asks Krishna 4 questions. That what is the position of such a person? He says, how is he situated? How does he speak? How does he sit? And how does he walk? And essentially, they are metaphors for what he's actually asking. So when he says that what are the symptoms of such a person, he's asking about the position. What is the position? How is he situated? And then Krishna says that such a person is detached from both happiness and distress. How does he become detached? By giving up material desires, and consequently does not need any external stimulants. Second question was that how does he speak? So speaking is basically how we respond to dualities. And Krishna says, does not react to any kind of dualities. He is same in misery and happiness, good and evil. So the first two questions, they talk about the characteristics of the person. So they are describing the state of the person. Then Arjuna asks, how does he sit? So sit indicates how does he control. Control is senses. So he controls his senses by experiencing a higher taste. He does not suppress them, but controls them to serve the Lord. And the final question is, how does he conduct himself? Arjuna says, how does he walk? So Krishna says that he is not interested in engaging the senses with the object. He is situated in a position of receiving the mercy of the Lord. So the first two describes the state, the last two describes the activities. What is he doing? And this has deliberately been put here by Krishna, because while we read the rest of the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, this is what will help us understand it. So reading the Bhagavad Gita is not a passive exercise. So as we ourselves try and become more detached, we will get more understanding from the Gita. We can relate more to the instructions that Krishna gives. So what is Krishna telling us? That Bhagavad Gita is not a book of armchair philosophy. If you want to get the most out of the Bhagavad Gita, begin to act in this way. Try to become a sthita prajna. So this concludes the second chapter. And I'm going to pause over here and see if you have any questions on the second chapter. After that, I'll start with the third chapter.
Will this slide be available to us, Prabhu?
I will send it to you. So I didn't send it last week because we hadn't finished the chapter. But now that we have, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Shri Padma Manjari, Mataji?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, the question that was asked, you asked one of the group, or about what changed with Krishna like refuting the Vedas. Is it because in chapter 2 we see Arjuna surrendered and Krishna being the guru? Does what change?
Both the instructions were given after Arjuna surrendered. So they are given to Arjuna in the same mode, but as Prabhu was sharing, they represent a progression. So before you can speak about trigonometry, you need to speak about algebra. So that's how Krishna is, and that's how the chapters will also unfold. Thank you. Gayatri Mataji.
Hare Krishna. So I wanted to ask one or two questions. So Krishna says that the soul or jiva is immutable and it's undividable, so it cannot be divided. So my question is, if we think that Lord Brahma is Jiva Tatma, how can he be in two places if Jiva cannot be divided? He can be, like, for example, we know that he is Lord Brahma and he comes to Chaitanya Lila as, I forgot his name, Hridas Thakur, or what was his name in Chaitanya Lila? So if Jiva cannot be divided, how can he be at two places and, in two bodies if Jiva cannot be divided? That's first question. And second question, if Jiva is in...
So let me answer the question, then you can go to the next. So what you're describing is siddhis. It's not impinging on the nature of the soul, but these are mystic powers that advanced yogis have. So we see in Bhagavatam, where Karda Muni divides himself into 9 to enjoy with his wife. And then we see Krishna dividing himself into 16,000 to be with his wives. So these are all mystic powers the yogis have, that they can be at more than one place at the same time, right? Devas have that power. When Krishna came, then all the devas expanded and came along with him to serve him. But they were also maintaining their position in the heavenly kingdom. So again, it's a manifestation of their mystic powers.
Well, the second question is a kind of similar, which I was thinking, if jiva is immutable, sometimes we see that there were 2 jivas which incarnated in one body, and they became from 2, they became 1. Like, for example, the other day we were listening the lecture about the Vrindavan Das Thakur, and it says that he is a partial incarnation of Vedavyas and someone else, I forgot the other name. So if the jiva is immutable, how come 2 persons get into one body and it's a one person?
It's one body, but nevertheless, so this whole concept of combined incarnations, it is explained in different ways. The answer to the question in a general way is still the same, that it's a manifestation of the mystic siddhis. But whether the 2 jivas are residing simultaneously within the body, or whether one jiva is empowering the other jiva, and therefore they are considered to be together. So that part is never really clarified. But we do know that there are many cases. For instance, you were talking about Chaitanya Leela. So in Chaitanya Leela, the understanding philosophically is that one of the jiva is training the other jiva. So when we say combined incarnation, then one is a more exalted personality than the other, and in some cases trains the others in the service of Krishna. In some cases, they're coming together to enhance the service of that particular personality to Krishna. In all cases, it does not impinge on the immutability of the soul. The general answer again is that this is accomplished through the siddhis that these personalities happen. One of the examples that is given is that if a teacher has a student that is very much dedicated to him, then one can say that the teacher is working through the student. So even though the teacher has not become the student, but for all purposes, the student is representing the teacher. So this is one example where you could say that the teacher is present in the student, but he is present in terms of unity of teachings and purpose. One way to understand it.
Okay. Hey Krishna, thank you.
Okay, is it okay? Gayatri Mataji?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good questions. Yeah. Vanita Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. I just have a quick question. There's several places while we're doing questions, they're saying English meaning of the verse, and then there's like 2 or 3 words from a text. Do you specifically want the meaning, or you as an answer, or would you want us to relate it, like explain it a little? There's several like English meaning of the phrases.
So are you talking about the test, writing the verse and the translation?
Yeah, those questions that we are doing, the closed
So-
book questions, there are several
Sure.
questions that ask English meaning of the phrase or the words.
So
So those are like,
something close by is fine. Doesn't have to be exact, as long as it conveys the meaning.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Jay Govind.
So, Prabhu, just following up on the question of Gayatri Mataji, we had received one question. We were asked a question by biochemist professor, and her question was like we have so many cells in our body, and or when the scientists are working on a cell level, and when they are dividing the cell, so like how does, like, if say one cell gets divided into two, so how does the soul, like, what happens to the soul, like how immediate, I mean, like a cell has one soul, but it's now got divided into two or three or four, so that many souls enter the new cells, or one cell has many souls? So that was a very technical question which was asked, and you were like, oh, okay.
So there are two ways to understand this. One is by giving a generic answer that every living entity has a soul that is presiding over the body. Right? So there is one soul, and whether this living entity is unicellular or multicellular, there is one soul, and that soul is accompanied by a super soul, Paramatma, and that's how the body is functioning. Right? That's an answer that should satisfy if you're talking to a scientist. Now, if you're talking to somebody who has read Prabhupada's purports deeply, especially those in the Bhagavatam, then Prabhupada goes in a bit of detail over here, and he mentions that each and every cell in the body has a soul. And he bases that on the premise that the Paramatma exists everywhere. It even exists in the space between the atoms. And the second point is the Paramatma is never alone. Paramatma is always accompanied by an Atma. So based on that, he says that anything. Hare Krishna Ramchandra Prabhu. So based on that, he draws this conclusion that every cell there is a soul, there is a super soul, but they have different level of consciousness. Just like the soul within a plant, the consciousness is covered to a greater extent than between an animal and a human. So similarly, there are souls that are even having more covered consciousness, and those are the ones that exist in cells. And then he goes on to say that not even cells, but the reason that why does matter now this is not what Prabhupada says, but this is based on a discussion of what Prabhupada said, that why does matter display certain properties? So why does it comply with the law of gravitation? Why does it comply with the law of conduction of heat, etc., etc.? There is somebody that is making sure that those laws are abided by, which means that there is also a soul and a super soul there, and they are making sure that these properties are followed. Now, again, this is something that is more of a discussion topic rather than a topic to explain somebody who's coming from the outside. Even amongst devotees, I personally had discussions with different devotees on this. Prabhupada has not very conclusively explain things because he did not think that it was that important. The important thing for us to understand is that there is a jiva within every living entity that is accompanied by a Paramatma.
So Prabhu, I have a question on this. So when a person, like, because a soul is a soul, like, and of course, like the predominant soul occupying our body is like the predominant soul basically when the soul leaves the body. But when a person dies, so, and there are innumerable souls in our body, so they also leave at the same time, because the characteristic of a soul is the same, isn't it, for any soul? Of course, the predominant, the one which is a predominant, has the more power or whatever. But what about the other souls then?
There's no mention of what happens to the other souls at the time of death. And the point that I was making earlier was that Prabhupada mentions this exactly once in his purport in the Bhagavatam. He does not mention it as a principle there. So it's not a topic that he dwells upon in any level of details, because he does not think that it is very relevant for us at our level of advancement. That's the best answer I can give you, Mataji.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. So we have Radha Gopinath Prabhu, and after that, Ajit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisance. So, Prabhu, one of the question is, how do we isolate ourselves from when we say we should not have any expectations and we should we should do our duties and then not have any expectations? How do we isolate ourselves from our day-to-day work versus in this when we are associated with devotees? So can the same be applied to our material occupation?
Absolutely, it can be applied. It's a very good question, and it's a question that gets answered in more than one ways in the next chapter. So if you can hold on to the question, and if it still doesn't get answered in the next chapter, please ask it again and we'll address it.
Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Abhijit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisance. Prabhuji, I didn't understand the answer given by Bhagavati Prabhu on like why Krishna changed his tone from following the Vedas to not just consider it as a flowery word. Like, I didn't get the answer.
Sure, Prabhu. So there is a concept of Adikar. Adikar means that one acts according to their eligibility. So Adikar means that before you learn to walk, or before you learn to run, you learn to walk. Before you learn to walk, you learn to stand up. So essentially, Krishna is guiding Arjuna through the various levels of realization. For a person who is materially anchored, who thinks of the world as a place of material enjoyment, Krishna is talking about karma-kanda, that you perform your duties and you will enjoy. You are a Kshatriya, you fight and you will win an unparalleled kingdom and enjoy it. Right? So this is of a person who is materially anchored. But there is a person who may be more advanced, who is now beginning to see himself not as the body, but as the soul, which means that he is not invested in the enjoyments of the body. So what is the advice for him? So Krishna says, don't worry about this yam imam pushpitam vacham. Don't worry about all these flowery words in the Vedas. Therefore, that other people, the ones who are materially anchored. For you, do your duty, but do not be attached to either your fruits of the duty or the action itself. You know that famous verse 247, Karmanyavadikar ste mahapalishu kadarjana, right? So that is the advice given to those who are situated on the non-material platform. Right? And of course, Krishna does not stop here. He will later on take Arjuna to even higher levels of realizations. But for now, he's taking to these two levels.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Ramachandra Priya Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Prabhu, I have this question regarding the enjoyment argument of Arjuna, which he gives, that he says that he'll not be able to enjoy in the absence of the relatives and all these kinsmen if they are died on the battlefield. So I'm seeing like Krishna is counteracting that enjoyment from verses 31 to 37 or something like that in chapter 2. So, but he's not exactly counteracting that enjoyment argument of Arjuna. He's saying somewhat like, even if you die, you will go to the heavenly planet, or if you win this, you will rule on the earthly planet, a prosperous kingdom. So he's not exactly defeating that argument. So is that, Prabhu, do you know how he is disputing that one?
So you're right. He's countering the more fundamental drive of Arjun, which is enjoyment. So Arjun thinks that his enjoyment is to continuing to be able to associate with Bhishma, Drona, and the others. And Krishna is not promising that. But he's saying that you're looking for enjoyment. This is what will give you enjoyment, one way or the other. You know, obviously, if he dies and goes to heavenly planets, Bhishma and Drona may or may not be there. And if he wins, it means that he has killed Bhishma and Drona. Right? So in both cases, they're gone. So he's not addressing that, but he's talking about the more fundamental question of Arjuna that I would like to enjoy. And that's the expertise of a teacher, that rather than addressing the external question, they address the internal motivation behind the question. Okay. Later on, we'll see that Krishna may give answers that seem to be orthogonal, that they're like completely different. In this chapter only, like later on, you see that Arjuna asks that how does the person sit, how does he speak, how does he stand? Krishna does not say that he sits on a chair and he stands on his shoes and he walks in this way, but then he starts saying that how does the person conduct himself? How does the person react to dualities, right? Because he's looking at what Arjuna is actually aspiring to get through that question, and he addresses that. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. So we'll take one last question, and then after that, we will continue with the third chapter. So we have Bhagavati Prabhu, you have a question?
Yeah. Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhu. So this question came up in our discussion. So the Buddhi Yoga discussion. So when we hear the Buddhi Yoga in the purport, sometimes Prabhupada describes it as Bhakti Yoga. If you see that the Neha Bhikraman is the verse, that's probably devotional service. In other places, it's Nishkam Karma Yoga. And so it's Nishkam Karma Yoga, Buddhi Yoga, sometimes Bhakti Yoga. It's very interchangeably used. There's subtle differences. So can you expand on that, Prabhu, please?
So this is something that you will see throughout in the Bhagavad Gita, that Srila Prabhupada brings our attention back to Bhakti. At this point, it's too early for Krishna to speak about Bhakti. Because what is the most important component in Bhakti? Krishna. Krishna hasn't spoken about himself yet. He has just introduced Arjuna to himself. that you're not the body, you're the soul. But has he said anything about himself, that I am the Supreme Personality? So not until the 4th chapter does Krishna says. The 4th chapter, Krishna says like, Jam Kam Chame Divyam Yome Veti Tattva. Then he starts speaking about himself. So early to speak about Bhakti. But when he does speak, then Buddhi Yoga becomes Bhakti Yoga. So Prabhupada does not wait for that. And that is the discretion of the Acharya, because he understands that Krishna is guiding Arjuna to the platform of Buddhi Bhakti Yoga. Because Buddhi Yoga is practiced in two ways. Jnana Ashrit Buddhi Yoga, Bhakti Ashrit Buddhi Yoga. Right now, Krishna is speaking about Jnana Ashrit. Right? He has spoken Sankhya. He's saying you're not the body. Based on the fact that you're not the body, don't have any attachment to your bodily activities. Jnana Ashrit. Later on, he will say that not only are you not the body, but you have an eternal relationship with me. Based on that relationship, don't have any attachment to what you work. Do it for my pleasure. So that is Bhakti Ashram. Prabhupada does not wait for Krishna to come to that point, but he speaks about it right away. And that's the theme that Srila Prabhupada does. He starts with Bhakti, middle Bhakti, end Bhakti, so that by the time we read the purports, then the relationship of the Jiva with Krishna in the mode of Bhakti is strongly established.
Thank you, Prabhupada.
Okay. So this is the absolutely last question, and then we'll continue to the 3rd chapter. Indu Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. So, question on the enjoyment. So, again, Krishna says that Arjun, either when you win the battle, you would enjoy the kingdom, and if you lose, right, you would go to heavenly planets. So, again, correlating that to our material world, right? So, again, for Arjun, it was either way, it was a win-win situation. But in our material world, right, when we take that as, okay, if it's a success, like, okay, that's good for me. But when it's a failure, right, it's pretty much distress situation, or like it feeling like hell, right, when you do not get what you want. So even though Krishna is saying, like, be equipoised when it's happiness or distress, but how do we keep up with, like, being equipoised in both of those situations, either happiness or distress?
Thank you. That's a very good question. From a practical perspective, when we are faced with difficult situations, experientially difficult, as you're saying, that we may be in distress, we take shelter of philosophy. Right? We take shelter of what we have been taught. So we try something and we fail. What is it that we take shelter of? We take shelter of the fact that anything good or bad that is happening to us, who is the cause of it? There is only one person that is the cause of it. That is us ourselves. We are the only cause of good or bad things that are happening to us. So we did some pious activities in the past, good things are happening. We did some impious activities in the past, bad things are happening, right? So when we move the accountability to ourselves, the distress diminishes. So practically we see that you're cooking something and the food gets burned. You're cooking and then you say, okay, it's not really burnt, it's crispy. Somebody else is cooking and the food gets burned, you're upset about it. Why is this food so burned? This is why? Who has the accountability? When the accountability is on you, you say, okay, it's crispy. I really wanted it crispy. Right? So when we take the accountability of the results on ourselves, then our anger, our illusionment, that automatically diminishes. The second point is, what happens when something bad is happening to us? It means that the reactions to some impious activities that we did in the past have now been burnt away. So we were traveling with a whole load of bad karma. Now that load is lighter. So one less load for us to carry. So that's the second philosophical understanding, that good, this thing has happened to us, some bad karma has been extinguished. Now, hopefully, good things will happen. May or may not happen, it depends what we did in the past life, but hopefully, good things will happen. In both cases, we turn our attention, our accountability to ourselves. And that's the philosophical basis of becoming equipoised.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the third chapter more from the perspective of karma, because the third chapter is the introduction of karma. So one of the questions that is asked is that is Bhagavad Gita a book of violence? There was a court case against ISKCON in Russia by the mostly engineered by the Catholic Church over there. And the basis of their court case was that the Hare Krishna should be not allowed in the country because the basis of their philosophy is Bhagavad Gita. And they actually got scholars in Bhagavad Gita, people who knew Bhagavad Gita inside out, from a scholarly perspective, to show that this is a book which incites violence. So, show of hand, how would we respond to this allegation? Okay, Chaitanya Ras Prabhu.
The Bhagavad Gita is spoken by the Lord himself, who's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And whatever, whatever he spoke is the absolute truth. And even if it is for the purpose of establishing dharma, the killing has to be done, then it is absolute truth.
Okay, it's good, but you're speaking like a devotee. You're speaking like a devotee to a devotee. So you're making many presumptions that Krishna is the personality of Godhead, whatever he speaks is absolute. I say that no, Christ is the personality of Godhead, whatever he speaks is absolute. So they're difficult to convince, but from a spiritual perspective, absolutely right. Sarvakanta Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. So I would like to give the response I usually give to my classmates, because that question does come up, like, Bhagavad Gita, isn't it a book of violence? So usually I just keep it really simple. I tell them that it's more about standing up for what's right. So, and I usually give them the backstory, how the Pandavas, they were offered, they first tried all the options of peace first. And then when nothing else worked, then the last step was to stand up and fight for what's right.
Very good. So I'm not going to take any more answers. I think I have the right answer over here. I'm going to extend it a little bit. So a couple of facts of Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions fight 9 times. And I will send you the verses. So where Krishna mentions. So 9 times he asks Arjuna to fight. Out of the 9 times, 4 times is appearing in the second chapter when he is giving a generalized overview. He mentions Shanti 12 times. He mentions Ahimsa 4 times. And he mentions Dharma 25 times. So the Bhagavad Gita begins, what's the first verse in Bhagavad Gita? What's the first word in the first word, in the first verse of Bhagavad Gita?
Dharma Kshetra Kurukshetra.
Very good. So Bhagavad Gita begins with the word of Dharma. Krishna begins to speak the Bhagavad Gita when, what does Arjuna say in the 7th verse, 2nd chapter, Karpanya dosha bhata svabhava? Then he says, Dharma samudha cheta. He says, I'm confused about my dharma. So in response to that, Krishna begins to speak the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna ends the conversation of the Bhagavad Gita with Arjuna in chapter 18, verse 70. He says, Dharmayam samvadam. That whoever hears this conversation about dharma. So Bhagavad Gita is not a book of fighting, violence, or non-violence. It is a book of dharma. It so happened that Arjuna's dharma was to fight. And that's why Krishna spoke to him about it. But if we were to describe in one word, what is Bhagavad Gita about? It is a book about dharma. Now, what does dharma mean? Can somebody offer me a 30-second answer to that? What does dharma mean?
It's Prabhu, it's your constitutional position, like heat and light for fire.
Okay, very good. If you can raise your hand and allow me to call on you, that help me. So, right answer. So sometimes dharma is confused with religion. And Prabhupada makes this wonderful point in the purport that religion can change. One can be a Christian today, a Hindu tomorrow, a Muslim day after. But dharma never changes. So constitutional means that is what constitutes you. That will never change. So Bhagavad Gita is about the constitutional position of a living entity. In speaking about, well, I won't start karma also this time because we have 1 minute left. I wanted to maybe leave you with a little bit of interesting facts about Bhagavad Gita. So let's see, Bhagavad Gita, how many verses does Bhagavad Gita have?
700.
Okay, how many chapters?
18.
How many sections is the Bhagavad Gita divided into?
3.
Okay. Give somebody else a chance to answer. How many, what is the first section?
Prabhuji, can I?
Please go ahead, Prabhu.
Yeah, Prabhuji, Bhagavad Gita is divided into 5 sections. Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Karma.
Sorry, Prabhu. It's divided in 3. I think what you're talking about are the 5 topics.
Oh, okay.
That the Bhagavad Gita is divided in 3 sections, 6 chapters each. Karma, Bhakti,
and Jnana.
And Jnana. So those are the 3. Krishna actually speaks the Bhagavad Gita twice to Arjuna. So in Mahabharata, there is the Bhagavad Gita that is spoken in Bhishma Parva, which is the 700 verse, that is the popular one. Later on in the Ashwamedha Yagya Parva, Arjuna again approaches Krishna and he says that I actually, he comes with a similar proposition. I've forgotten all that you told me. So can you remind me what you said? And then Krishna chastises Arjuna again, saying that not good for you to forget. But because you're my friend, I will speak to you again. So then he speaks what is known as the Anugita. So the Anugita is close to 1100 verses long. It is different from Bhagavad Gita in the style that it's spoken. It is spoken more as an Upanishad, where the points are illustrated through conversations between different personalities. So Krishna says that once a Brahman approached a sage and they had this conversation. Or once these two people had approached their guru and had this conversation. So that Bhagavad Gita is more on Karam Kand, less on Bhakti. There is a third Gita that Krishna speaks in the Srimad Bhagavatam to Uddhav. That is called Uddhav Gita, appears in the 11th canto. And the focus of that Gita is more Bhakti. Obviously, if it's in the Bhagavatam, the focus is more Bhakti. Gita generally means singing. Geet, it's a song. So Bhagavad Gita means the song of God, the song that Krishna speaks. There are other Gitas also, right? There is Rudra Gita, there is Gopi Gita. So there are different personalities who sing, and they're also their exalted personalities. Their compilations are called Gita. Our Bhagavad Gita, that is the most famous, is this particular Bhagavad Gita that is spoken in the Bhishma Parva of Mahabharata between Krishna and his devotee Arjuna, comprising of 18 chapters and 700 verses. That is our Bhagavad Gita that we study. Okay, so I leave you with this thought, and next week we will start with the third chapter. So you probably had prepared for this session. Revise it again, and we will talk about the third chapter. Is one of the most interesting chapters because it brings forth so many intricacies of karma, and we can relate to karma because we are essentially in the first person relating to it. So we are actually executing it on a day-to-day basis. That's what makes it most interesting. So I'm not sure, Tulsi Priya, if you have a question or you forgot to.
Prabhu, yeah. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, right, I first spoke this to Vivaswan. So when he's saying that, we are supposed to understand that this is the, the same, the 700 verse one that he's talking about, is it?
Absolutely. Prabhupada mentions that when he says that I spoke the Gita, does not mean that he spoke the exact same 700 verses. It means that the message of the Gita was given for obvious reasons, right? Because this particular Gita has a conversation on the battlefield of Kurukshetra between Krishna and Arjuna. So when he says Imam Vivashvate Yogam Proktavano Avyavam, that he says, I spoke this to Vivashvan, the sun god, the understanding is that he gave the same message. Because later on he says that over the period of time, this message has been lost. Right? And then I see a question by what are the... So, yeah, so not 3 topics, Prabhu. There are Bhagavad Gita talks about 5 topics. Thank you for reminding me. So the Bhagavad Gita speaks about Krishna, speaks about Jiva, speaks about karma, speaks about Kal, and speaks about Prakriti. So Krishna, Jiva, Karma, Kal, and Prakriti. Prakriti is modes of material nature. And if you want to do a mentally stimulating exercise. Take the first verse of the Bhagavad Gita and see how it speaks about all the 5 topics of the Bhagavad Gita. So not all the verses speak about all the 5 topics. If you do a topical study, some verse speaks mostly about one topic, some will speak about karma, some speaks about Krishna, some speaks about jiva. The first verse talks about all the 5 topics. So, so take that. 3 divisions of Bhagavad Gita, I think I spoke on that. It's the first is karma, the second is jnana, and third is bhakti. So the way it is that the first 6 chapters are karma, the last 6 chapters are jnana, and the middle 6 chapters are bhakti. Srila Prabhupada would say that just like a pearl is protected by the shells of the oyster, bhakti is protected by karma and jnana. Okay, very good. So we will end over here. I will share the presentation of the 2nd chapter with Chaitanya Ras Prabhu, and he will share it further on. Next week, 3rd chapter. Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Prabhuji.
Krishna. Thank you,
Hare
Prabhuji.
Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.